Well, good afternoon, Ro. How you doing? And welcome all to our Conscious Conversations episode number 4. How are you doing, Ro? You good?
I'm good, thanks, Dan. I know it's been a while since our last opportunity to chat, so I'm excited about being on podcast today.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? We love doing this. We're really enjoying it, and we're learning a lot as we do it as well, which I think is an excellent thing as well. So yeah, episode number 4, which is fantastic, and today we agreed that we were going to explore the idea and the topic of discussion of states of change. We felt that was a good topic to discuss, especially as we've moved into the autumn months recently, and with the autumn equinox. Sort of certainly that spurred some thought and reflection in me, Ro. And as I said to you in the preparation leading up to this, we were knocking about ideas of what we could discuss, and the whole idea of conscious conversations is to explore good ideas, and I suggested this and you was well up for it, so thank you very much for that. Nice one. And I wanted to sort of today, Ro, just sort of get your perspective and your experience on the topic of states of change. And obviously we haven't defined what that is yet, we're going to just getting into the meat of it, but how do you feel about that, Ro? How's that land for you?
Yeah, I think states of change is relevant. It's seasonal. I think there's lots of social states of change that we're all going through right now, and I think a lot of people attempt to either finish a change that they committed to earlier on in the year about this time of year, and or they start thinking about the changes they want to implement as the new year comes into place. So yeah, I think it's a great subject, and I think from different directions, for different reasons, for different topics, we can definitely offer some insight and advice.
Yes, excellent. I knew that's brilliant, and I am really really keen to hear your perspective on it from if you don't mind me sort of just throwing out what sort of led me to that and what we were thinking about and 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 what got me reflecting, and then I'm really interested in seeing your perspective on that, right? Because obviously you've done a lot of coaching with people and you've seen a lot of people go through change, quite significant change. I know that for a fact from our conversations, and so yeah, I value your input on that. So do you mind me just talking about what sort of led me to reflect on that? Is that okay?
Yeah, please. I'm super interested.
No worries. Okay, so what it was pretty much around about the autumn equinox, and it was I'm not normally the sort of person that spends a lot of time reflecting around sort of key points in the year. It's not something I normally do, but for some reason this year I did, and I think it is because I'm in a very reflective state myself in the sort of my own personal changes, and I'm not going to sort of dwell on that too much, but it was just more about the fact that it was about that what happened to me, and I started to reflect on my changes, the changes I'm going through, and how I saw it as a little bit of a duality where there was a lot of change that I was experiencing, and that is really positive and challenging at points, and all of these different sort of myriad experiences we have. But also on the other side, there was elements that I was yearning for some change in that weren't happening, and so I sort of saw it as like there are two sides to the coin of it, really. And further to that, I couldn't help but sort of reflect and think about the people that I've interacted through during the year. So there's been lots of people I've been talking to and coming into contact with, yourself, other professionals, people I've met at the promotional events and stuff, and I'm aware of lots of people's different changes that they're going through, or lack of change that they're yearning for, and how it's such a diverse experience. That's what made it a really interesting topic to me, and that's what I sort of was, keen to sort of get your viewpoint on. So yeah, that was it. Have you got any sort of addition you could make to that in any way?
Yeah, I think change, we can overcomplicate it. I think we sometimes have a social and spiritual, maybe personal belief that change needs a lot of content, it needs a lot of ingredients for change to be motivated, or manifested or permanent. And so I think if we could offer one gift today, it would be make change easy. And how we make change easy comes with many different strategies. So it depends how excited you want to get me about this. But simplify change is the key. The stories that we make up about what is possible either helps hinder or facilitate our change. And often, if the change isn't already happened naturally, it's because we have beliefs around it maybe not being possible or not the right time time, or we don't have enough resources, or that we need some other like tetra block to put into place before that can happen. And I think we have, if we were to really look, we have enough evidence in our lives to prove that change doesn't actually always, and mostly, it doesn't happen like that. It often comes out of the blue, like weather on a sunny day that turns muddy and lightning. And I think if we were open to remembering that, it would make change really, really easy, or easier.
That's interesting, really interesting. Taking the weight out of it as such, you know. Yeah, absolutely. I can hear, yeah, I hear what you're saying with that. Personally, on a personal level, that resonates very, very deeply. I can see that. Lots of things you said in that resonate. Actually, that the first thing is when you was talking at the beginning, you said that, yeah, recognizing that change doesn't have to be difficult or hard, and the belief structures around it that might be the blockages there. That's really interesting, because I was thinking about that, about it being, as you was talking, the words point of reference come into it, in terms of like where you're coming from, where your viewpoint is, what lens you're looking through stuff. And then you mentioned that, and it was like, yeah, absolutely. So that makes a lot of sense, and it makes that makes it. And taking the weight out of it as well is the expected outcomes is part of that, isn't it? And limiting self belief structures, as you mentioned, can sometimes make you put up your own barriers. Perhaps.
Yeah, because
We'll do that. That's not a point of judgment, of course, you know.
yeah, no, I hear you, and often we don't think about the step after the change, like you said, like the benefits of the change, and sometimes the benefits of the change are harder to believe than the change itself. I think what is maybe a pattern that we can try to get ahead of is that human beings generally take action for two reasons, and that is to move away from pain or move towards pleasure. And most of us do wait until we're backed right into a corner and we're suffering and having a massive meltdown before we say yes to something alternative. And if we can somehow more regularly every day move towards pleasure as an action of what can bring me pleasure today, even amongst the tsunami of life's challenges, can this next 10 minutes, this next hour, this next week be actually based around pleasure and peace, pleasure and peace. And the more we make change in response to pleasure and peace, the easier it is. It's much easier to move towards pleasure than it is to move away from pain. Moving away from pain and suffering is a push mechanism, is that I don't want this here, it's resistance. And moving towards pleasure is easy, it's pulling, it's a I desire, it's a yes energy. And even if you place that in the most complex or difficult situations, we can move a little bit, just tilt the table a tiny bit towards feeling pleasure, peace, and at the very least we can feel satisfied. And again, even if it's in 1 minute, 1 hour, 5 minutes this week, this month, how can I increase my experience of feeling satisfied, even though the completeness of the change hasn't arrived yet?
That's really, really, really positive, and a really, really almost like a mindset sort of. I know it's not quite like a mindset specific, but it's almost like a way of training yourself into a new mode of thinking and being. And it's actually really interesting and as you say, the difference between resistance and pushing against something, pushing something away, or just stepping to something that feels natural and flows naturally is a different sort of experience. I hear that. And actually, like, it shouts sort of neuroplasticity to me. The idea that through practice and through training, a bit like you'd go into the gym and work your muscles, through gentle reframing and different practices and different ways of thinking, we can actually learn to step into the next moment in the way you want to, rather than being pulled. And when you use the word pull, I use this in my own coaching with the mindfulness, is how to use mindfulness to be aware, and then be aware enough to be able to choose the next step you take rather than being pulled in the direction of what your automatic tendency might be doing. So when you was talking about that really resonated with me on that side, because that's like it's like a habit releasing and a habit breaking type of modality, you know, and I think
Yeah.
it's really powerful. I think that is a really practical, powerful thing if you can cultivate that to use in your life, I think, you know. So,
Yeah, I think it would be super helpful if we could just get an eraser and actually delete the word habit, because the word habit even comes with a set of expectations. It comes with the assumption that if we do things long enough, it stays the same. And actually, there's recent scientific research out there, and a lot more up-to-date evidence to prove that things don't become permanent by habitual repetition, and there is no such thing as the wires in your brain being really strong because you've done it for a long time. And I kind of like this because this one gives us a bit of a hit of personal responsibility, that we can't necessarily blame our non-change in the permanence of a habit being there for 20 years, 1 year, 1 week. But also it can be exciting to know that at any given moment we can change the narrative. And by change the narrative, I come from a place of biology. Like with your mindfulness, most of us practice it because it feels better in our body. So if we can get the body um, to experience new ways of change, then it makes external actions of change much easier. And you mentioned neuroplasticity, and I really like that sort of concept, because it is one of the brain's anatomy that actually hasn't been disproved yet, that we can stretch and make the brain's pieces different.
yeah.
And there's a lot of science around the brain is very vague, and socially we take on lots of beliefs around the brain's anatomy that we then turn into our personalities. And actually there's when you look at the nitty-gritty of scientific research around the brain, we know very little really, and the things that we do know comes through the filter of what we socially think is appropriate to believe. And I guess the ignorance of not knowing, which usually comes through the gaze of our spiritual or other self. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought the neuroplasticity to the table, because it's the bit that is still very much evidence-based.
Completely, it completely and absolutely, as you say, the previous modes of thinking, that we were born, we had our upbringing, our formative years, and then our mind is fixed, and then that's our model for is now almost fully debunked now, isn't it? And huge amounts of evidence. You know, there's some debate around the evidence scientific. However, there has been a lot of clinical studies going into it, and the signs and the outcomes have been very promising, and showing that actually not only can we alter the way we uh, respond to things. So you could argue that would be like neural pathways. If you wanted to go that way, it would be kind of that. So that almost like the way we're wired, even though we're not using that terminology, but just to put it into context. And then, but not only that, but actually change the architecture of our mind with the parts that we're using growing and decreasing in. So for instance, stress response reducing, if you're able to reduce your stress through meditation or other practices, as one example, you know. And yeah, it is and it's that possibility. You mentioned the word possibility, that there's always that potential for change. On you're always on the cusp of potential for change, and I think that's such a positive thing to have in your life. I think, you know, to have that, you know,
Mm.
especially if you've experienced the other side of the coin of feeling stuck in some way, because it can unravel that horridness of that, you know.
But I'd like to take that coin now, and I'd like to peel the gold wrapping off and remember what's on the inside. Is that there are many variations and versions of that coin, and there's many different perspectives of that coin. And it got me thinking when you said about the neural pathways. Again, this is a classic way we in society has taken a biological uh, what's that word? Anatomical. My dyslexia is really, really on point this week. Anatomical response, and we've placed a psychology process on top of it. So the neural pathways is simply, there's my hand, And when I look at it or close my eyes, I still can create movement. But what we've done in society is we've placed this label of meaning of that neural pathway. And there is a little research out there to prove that there's that, meaning plus action affects your experience. But essentially, the brain's job is to close the hand if you asked it to close. It doesn't really get involved with, ooh, that was a nice hand closing experience, thank you very much. Its job is to just close the hand or to pick up the water. And so, but I kind of like it. If we wanted to spin, and if we wanted to peel off that gold wrapper of that chocolate coin, we could say that actually adding meaning to movement is helpful, but assuming that there has to be meaning for there to be movement from an anatomical perspective, from a neural pathways perspective, I think is not helpful, because we then have to force ourselves to want to do it before it even happens.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and that's kind of the angle you've been coming from today, isn't it? Is that change doesn't have to be forced or pushed through or whatever. Sometimes it can happen in a natural flow, and so if you're being easy and you're flowing, then it will happen. And I suppose that's in line with, as you say, that the words you used, which was that there has to be a belief. You have to make it happen in the first instance. You have to make the change happen, but that's not necessarily the case. Is kind of the point where you're coming from, right? That change flowed into.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I don't know if you've heard the you would have heard, but the stages of grief, the 5 stages of grief. Shock and denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Well, we can use that as a way for us to check our biology as we move through the negotiation of change as well. And I thought maybe we could use your mindfulness approach to maybe do this. Whenever we're ready, I can take you through that sort of little exercise. But when we think about the 5 stages of grief, we actually go through all of those things when attempting to create change as well, and the emotions and the embodiment sensations that go with those stages. And in your mindfulness, you teach a lot about what's going on in your body, and how can you be mindful of what's happening in your body, because they're the first cues of change emotionally and mentally, right?
Oftentimes people will feel something in them, they'll be tense before they even have become fully aware that the situation is wrong. They can just feel it's wrong. People would say, I just felt it was wrong. That's how people would commonly describe it. Any sort of technical terms to it, but really it's like your body being the most. John Kabat-Zinn described it as like you've got the most sophisticated data gathering system in the universe, and it's just there for you.
Yeah. And we do the equivalent of one not running a report, but if we do run a report, we run a report from 10 years ago. We go, 10 years ago this was bad, so I'm not going to do it again now. And you mentioned about this doesn't feel good, that clients usually know that they don't feel good. And again, I think it's super helpful for us to practice with your mindfulness techniques on those moments where we do feel good, because if we can cultivate our relationship with more of the good feeling receptors, then they're the ones that are going to help us softly lean towards pleasure and move away from this pushing mechanism. And I guess the question is, well, how do I do that? How do I do that in the mix of change that I didn't consent to? How do I do that in the mix of change that feels scary or hard? How do I do that in the context of illness or grief?
You've hit that question just exactly. It was on the tip of my tongue. It's like that's what this natural conversation is leading to. Is okay, that's all cool, that's the framework, but how? And that's where the power lies, isn't it? Is understanding what tools we can use to actually make that happen. So that's also been the journey that has come to the front with me, with my mindfulness and my coaching, is going to that point. It's okay having the awareness and being able to catch stuff, but the next important stage that's actually a useful tool is knowing what you can do to then, facilitate whatever it is you want, whatever change after you've noticed it, and
Because what I like about the frame of mindfulness is it teaches you to go from your head down into your body. It tells you to feel and see and smell and touch, and as the first point of how, that would be where I would start. It doesn't matter what you're doing, what's going on in your world. Can you tune into your five senses? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? Noticing taste in your mouth. Can I reach for something to remind me that I'm here and now? Can I reach for myself to remind me that I'm here and now? And that's in both when I'm feeling activated and anxious, but also when I'm feeling yummy and gooey and happy and full of satisfaction.
yeah,
We almost don't dare indulge in those satisfying moments for fear that they might disappear. We kind of grab onto them a bit.
that's that's a really powerful thing to say, and I agree with that statement.
Yeah, but if we can inflate those moments, however short, like someone said to me recently, that listening to the recordings that I send or have been sending this particular person, they really help and they really make a difference. But what about the other 6 hours, 23 and a half hours? What about the other 3 days where I don't feel good? And my response was, well, you have a choice. You can have 24 hours where you don't feel good, or you can have 23 hours, 40 minutes, and 48 minutes of feeling, rough. So we've got to catch as many of the 5 minutes as we possibly can, because before we know it, all of those 5 minutes, they stretch out into an hour, into a day, into a week, into a month, and before we know it, we're noticing that we might have moved out of our daily anxious activation, and it might just show up on certain times, and then before we know it, it passes through from that, and then it only activates in times in our life where it's appropriate to do so.
Yes,
So what's our choice? To take advantage of the 5 minutes or 1 hour or one day, or to say none of it's worth it?
and furthermore, what's our choice? Take advantage of those 5 minutes, knowing that, as you said, which is very much where I come from as well, is that it is not an overnight thing. It is a process of growth and development, and it's like planting a seed and letting it grow. It needs to take time, and it might start there, as you say, with the 5 minutes. But as you say, with practice and dedication, it can become more than that, and it can grow into something bigger. And as you say, it could grow into the thing that actually is the dominant force in your life as such.
Yeah.
Dominant experience.
Yes. Yeah.
Rather than it being, like 50-50 or weighted the other way. So I agree with that the growth process is something that is a part of it. It isn't an instant fix, one size fits all blueprint sort of methodology. It's actually just
But it could be for this 5 minutes,
for the 5 minutes, of course,
and
yes.
and
Sorry, I was
that
sort of
no, no,
talking
no.
about the context of a person's sort of journey in development, but you're right.
Yes.
In that 5 minutes, the tool that's used could be that. Agree.
Yeah, and there can be this social escalator, that I think is an unhelpful perspective. And if we think about escalator, it's passive, right? You get on at the bottom step and then you go up to the top. And these social escalators for change are generally not how things work. That's not how things work. But also, the escalator's passive. You get on the escalator and it takes you somewhere. So a lot of people can have the belief that you have to take the first step, and that's the only thing that you need to do to take you up to the top. But also the idea of this social framework, that change looks a certain way, that it takes a certain pace, that there's no backward in coming forward, that I think it can be unhelpful. And I think it would be good to remind ourselves that change arrives in a million different forms, that we have to be open to those forms of change coming through in ways that we didn't expect. And that's both a good thing and sometimes a challenging thing. And also, the pace of growth is kind of irrelevant. Like, the seed that's in the soil is just as valid as the oak tree that grows 48 years later. And the idea that we don't validate ourselves until we're the oak tree is really causing a lot of suffering for us.
I agree with you so much.
Mm.
Exactly what you're saying. So much, like, absolutely. And actually, like, in that as well, if I just can bolt something onto that,
Yeah.
you described it's like I was saying earlier about the about change coming when I was reflecting on the people I've interacted in the conversations. It's such a wide ranging experience for people and so varied, and you said the same thing there. And actually I think that's one of the things that can make you, when you said change can come from unexpected angles or in ways that don't fit this like model, as you said, that can also make change very difficult for people to relate to each other on. And so when people go through changes and that causes, whether that change be something they've spurred themselves through their own will and action, or whether it be something that's happened to them and then they've responded and taken the next step, it can sometimes make it difficult for people to understand that person's perspective while they're doing that, and it can cause
Mm.
conflict and friction. And that is certainly something that I've experienced personally, but I know other people have as well. And it's just, I think, part of that, the diversity of the subject can also lead to those aspects. And not only have we got these, as you say, parameters, we may be playing ourselves with this modality of thinking that it should be this, should be this. It's words like should and must again, isn't it? Doing that when actually it doesn't work like that. But then you've got external factors that can maybe come in and play on it as well, and that can be tricky, you know. Anyway,
Yeah.
when he was talking, that really jumped out as something that.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I see, yeah, I see you in that experience because again, there's again a little bit of society, and we are society, right? So at any point we can mix things up, but society says that safety looks like this particular shape of progression. Success looks like you start at the bottom rung and you work your way up. Success looks like you go to university, you get a job, you live happily ever after. Success looks like that you meet someone, you go on a few dates, you move in, you buy a house, you get married, you have children, then you fall asleep gently as you pass on through life in your matching rocking chairs. And again, the social expectations, as in me and you as society, what we can do for each other is to let go of some of those. Now, the good thing about that is that underneath is my desire for you and your desire for society, and for each other, is that we want everyone to have the fastest route to safety and success. That's the intention. However, what happens, like what you said, is in the face of change, everybody's fear response comes up and be like, well, why is he doing it back to front on the success model? Why is this process not going in the way that I expect and feel safe to? And the majority of our lives don't work in the way that this passive escalator does. It doesn't work, it's out of date,
Yeah,
it's
it's true.
dysfunctional, and it's actually harmful. It's a
I agree.
harmful belief. So let's
With everything you just said there, everything you just
yeah,
said
so
there.
let's get rid of the social escalator of success,
Yeah.
the social escalator of safety, and get used to one, using our own legs to take the steps we want to take at any given moment and take accountability for those steps. But also, if we want to step off the bloody escalator and just live our lives and not be growing for a change, that's important too.
So it's just another one of the examples of states of change, isn't it? I agree.
Yeah,
There's no,
yeah,
there's what's right for you and another person is not what's right for me necessarily, and it's
yeah.
absolutely.
And I think with regards to kind of the states of change, one of the states is stopping as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, and there is this anxiety, especially those of us that are, I guess, enthusiastic and curious about learning and life in general and evolving as a human being. There can be a way where we continuously fatigue ourselves with attempting to make ourselves grow bigger, faster,
Yeah,
better. And I would just like to remind everyone and remind ourselves that actually today I'm enough. I don't need to grow. In fact, I'm going to spend the next year deliberately staying where I am and get used to how that feels. Because often change happens whether we like it or not, but we don't really get chance to be in the change. Like, can we just be? Can we be in the state of change that stop, not just this constant self evolution? And even nature takes a break from growing, right? Even nature just says, I'm going and I'm going in, and you won't see anything on the outside for now, but I'm going in
yeah.
preparation for the next stage or state of change.
Hundred that this happened repeatedly throughout this podcast and happens in every other podcast way, but almost every line and sentence you were saying, it was just landing really powerfully. I could either draw direct parallels from my own personal experience or from the things I know of others, and that was, yeah, I agree with everything you said there, really do. And as you say, this message of, yeah, being, learning to experience and be with what is right now, and be comfortable with that without trying to place these suppositions and judgments on and pressures effectively
Mm.
of that I be doing this, I must have achieved this by now, surely I should be here. And and it's not, I can relate to that in a very personal way. There has definitely been, that's been part of just going back to kind of my reflection on my own experience of change and my state of change, was that I've had to do that. I've had to do that kind of, okay, that is what my heart was yearning for. I wanted that by then, and I want that, but I've had to go, well, it isn't that. That's not my experience. That's not the reality. So I've got kind of two choices. I can either let that become something that I dwell on negatively, or I go, well, okay, it is what it is. It is what it is, and let's just flow with it. And that's not, as you
But
say,
what
it's not always
is,
easy to do. It's not always
yeah,
easy to do, or it doesn't feel instinctive and natural to do, should I say?
yeah, but that phrase, it is what it is, like, what is that? If we were to place that in the 5 stages of grief, I would say that that would be acceptance stage.
Mm.
Um, it is what it is means that at the moment things are unchangeable.
Yeah.
And what's powerful about that is that we can not necessarily relax, but we can get used to the environment and take care of ourselves the best we can, as long as we remember to listen for the next state of change and we check in with our environment about what's changed, because often we can be in it is what it is mode for too long.
Yes,
Um,
that's really
would
good.
it be helpful to maybe remind ourselves of the 5 stages and then maybe add the coaching to each one of those stages?
I That would be excellent, and we didn't go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, with that, the grief process, and I thought that was a really good thing to bring up. So yes, let's do that. Let's do that, and let's bring in some practical advice as well.
Yeah. So we're going to use the 5 stages of grief, not to layer any difficult or negative topic, but just because everyone is likely to recognise the emotions that's part of the 5 stages of grief. And remember, grief is a sense of loss, and that loss may be in manifestation. It may be in our external reality, but it might also be something that we believe that is never going to happen for us. And that can be a personal narrative that may be blocking our state of change.
Yeah.
So often the first place that we land with change, and or in this instance of the 5 stages of grief, is shock and denial. And in shock and denial generally comes, if we were to put it in the context of change, is I know change needs to happen, but it can wait. And I'm wondering what sort of biological cues that we would have as human beings when we're in that shock and denial. What sort of biological cues would you teach to be in that shock and denial stage? Knowing that everyone's cues are different, but there's bound to be a couple that are familiar.
Yeah, I think definitely heightened energetically, very sort of like feeling like action needs to be taken, like you're going, no, you're saying a step, no, that's not how, I don't want that to be, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not how it is. And
Mm-hmm.
as you say, from the denial aspect, it's like a very, it's not a passive thing. It's something you have to invest effort into, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You'd be challenging something.
Yeah. So the muscles might be ready for action and pushing. Would that be right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from a physical point of view, sorry, yeah, I didn't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
absolutely.
Both is good.
Tense and like I would say, yeah, very activated physically. Very.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there'd be a lot of stress response. I think going on,
Hmm.
adrenaline, a lot of cortisol, a lot.
Yeah, and even if we were to place this in something we really, really, really want, let's say we really, really want this change, we will likely still hit a shock and denial of, is this possible? When can it happen? What don't I have? What do I have? So it's bound to be that we still arrive at this emotional state for things that we're super pumped and ready to do. So it doesn't always have to be about moving, forcing us to change, but shock and denial, what biological cues are there at this state? So listen to your body, and it can come with the terminology or the narrative in the head of, I know that change needs to happen, but it's not a priority and it can wait.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if we were to think of a graph, on the left side there would be an arrow going up, and this would represent productivity and engagement. And this comes from the Kubler-Ross change curve, so you can Google it, but it's a very simple diagram. And then at the bottom, there's an arrow that goes to the right, and this is time frames. And at shock and denial, we are sort of just above the halfway point in productivity and engagement, but we're on the way down. So we're moving more likely away from the change, which is why the next emotion that generally we hit is anger. And anger can come with life coaching in a narrative of, I didn't consent to this, I don't want this now, why did it happen, who did it, and what's it all about? And I wonder what the biological cues for that anger might be in your body, and I guess your biological emotional cues too.
Well, so well, there's lots that I can. Yeah, definitely with anger, there's a real restlessness, I would say, attached to it, like a real the way I would describe it would be. Sorry, I've slipped into talking from my own personal point of view there.
That's all we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's fair enough. Yeah, I just sort of naturally did that without giving much thought. But for me, it manifested very much in a restlessness, like in a complete discontentment. I think is a word where you absolutely cannot sort of abide almost what your current experience is.
Yeah.
It's just that is a from that angle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously I was trying to frame it in for my own with regards to the stages of grief. So I was just trying to put it into that a little bit more linked in with that. But yeah,
Yeah.
so restlessness and complete discontentment is definitely, it makes you, that's like an impetus to want to go somewhere else, get away from this place you are at the moment.
Yeah, so it may come with both heightened awareness of body pain, but it might also come with disassociation and a run strategy, right? And here on the graph, we go from shock and denial, and we go down into anger. So it might even look like that you withdraw, that you actually go completely quiet. So again, and everyone's experience of this, and maybe people can feedback as to
That would be
which,
really interesting.
yeah, which part is most, are they most able to see. And again, this idea of I didn't consent to this is generally the thing that activates our anger in life in general. I didn't consent to that, whether it be they put the hazelnut syrup in, not the vanilla, or whether or not someone cut you up in the car, or whether or not something else happened. When we take away our consent, even if it's assumed consent, generally the response is anger. So what am I consenting to? What am I not consenting to? And how is that? How does that make sense in the context of my emotion of anger? And then on the graph, we dip down a little bit more. We go into bargaining. So the sweet thing about bargaining is that the bargaining part of you is got minimal resources, but that part of you still really wants to help. And I think at this stage, if we can cultivate the bargaining stage, at this stage you can almost put a pause on you moving through the rest of the grief cycle. Because you don't necessarily, in my opinion anyway, have to hit the wall of all of those emotions before you feel a bit better. And it certainly doesn't have to happen in sequence like that either. You don't have to be, angry second and acceptance last. Everyone's different. But what I like about bargaining is that they're trying to help. They're going, yeah, but okay, it's like what we do with kids. Okay, do you want 2 sausages or 3? The assumption is they're going to eat some sausages, So the bargaining, it comes from a place where we learn to self-negotiate. We change the narrative and offer crumbs of promises of change. And anyone with children will understand this negotiation phase. And I think it's a really simple place to be in if we can reparent ourselves in that moment and see if we can offer ourselves little crumbs of promises and negotiation and reassurance when we're at the bargaining stage. So the bargaining stage is a bit of a mix between, okay, I'm on the roller coaster, I'm strapped in, and I'm just about going over the edge. I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to hold on and I'm going to trust that I'm being held. So it comes with an opportunity to feel okay. To feel okay.
And that's what was jumping to the front of my mind as you was talking there, is when just going back to what we was talking about before we started talking specifically about the grief process. You was talking about catching those wins, catching those moments where we're like, we there is positivity and there is something that brings us peace and joy, and if we learn to catch them in the smallest of moments, it can grow to something bigger. We was talking about that. Well,
Yeah.
that's for me kind of what you're talking about there, is about taking that moment, and that hope and the possibility is very much an example of that. I think just
Mm,
listening to what you've been saying, it's like
mm,
it's almost an example of that. That in that moment you're taking the moment to acknowledge. Yeah, well, hang on. Let me get the word. You're not really. It's just part of the stage of process you're in at that moment. Is the bargaining is the part of it, and that mechanism has, the better way to describe it is that mechanism has a bit of that what you was talking about.
yeah.
The hope and the possibility is a better way.
Yeah. Yeah. And often, when people are in negotiation state, is that they write lists. They try to do 5,000 different things at once. They attempt to say a semi yes to multiple different things. They may even find that they're hungry, but they end up just nibbling. So they can be some of the biological cues that we can get when we're in negotiation. Is 1 minute we're hot, next minute we're cold. 1 minute we fancy going out, next minute we don't want to. So those biological cues are again really helpful, because they're, again, maybe we'll go more into this in another session, but at that point we can learn to single task. And when we single task, we then start to feel solidly much more better and safer in the face of change that we either did want or didn't want. Um,
That's super interesting. It makes me absolutely. I hear what you're saying. There's two things that jump straight away on that. I have to say, first of all, as I mentioned a minute ago in the anger bit, where I said about restlessness, it makes me ponder whether actually, when I was talking about restlessness, I was actually maybe talking about this stage, because
yes,
it was, so maybe my
yeah.
response a minute ago was actually slightly inaccurate without me realising actually it was
Mm.
more to do with this stage, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just sort of just thinking that. The second thing I'm going to say is there was a thing you said to me a long, long time ago when you said about almost like sometimes by having all the toys out all over the idea, like the idea of the child with all their toys out, and then they learn to what is actually important to them and what they actually want to play with, and all the other stuff is surplus to requirements. It's a little bit like that messiness when you were
Mhm.
describing that
Mm.
restlessness of the bargaining about trying lots of different things. It's almost like that. It's almost like finding your way through all these options and all these
Mm.
possibilities, isn't it?
Mm.
Like the analogy you gave me before, it just made me think of that. I don't know whether that was in any way relevant, but it just made me think of that.
Yeah, no, it is. And one thing that you spoke about in your mindfulness coaching is that mindfulness is the practice of seeing the mess and that being okay.
Mm.
It's about, oh, interesting. All the socks are on the floor and none of them match. So yeah, absolutely. So the next stage, as part of this particular model, is the lowest place emotionally that we might feel the least place where we can initiate change externally, and this they call depression. So you go from bargaining to a place of depression. And what is depression? I think the word is maybe overused and over self-diagnosed as well. What does it mean to be depressed? What would be the opposite, to be decompressed? And so for me, depression is a signal that I haven't got enough space to make me comfortable. And so if you feel depressed, see if there's a way of you to find more space. Either in this moment, could you get rid of all these plants? This week, could you clear your diary? Next time you have a bath, could you lock the door and being there for an hour. Like depression, I'd like to offer a social reframe of that. It's a place where generally someone may feel like that they don't have enough space to be or feel what they want to feel. And this, in the context of the grief cycle, would make sense, right? Because they're now in a place that have significantly changed and they haven't got the same things that helped them flourish before. And the narrative that may come to this with this as an example is, how can I do this? It's too hard. I'm not ready. We argue for our own limitations. And even though that narrative, I think, is the truth, because when you're feeling depressed, when you're feeling like you don't have enough room, that is the truth. It's too hard from this place. I don't have enough resources from this place. So in my opinion, depression, having not enough space, brings up a risk assessment. It brings up an audit of our lives, of ourselves and who we are. So if you find yourself, a lot of people use the phrase over-analysing, but all analysing is analysing. It's just our social constructs that tell us whether it's over or not, and generally that's not helpful. So if you find yourself analysing, risk assessing, doing loads and loads of life audit, then it's likely that you haven't got enough room in your life to be who you want to be and to make the changes that you want to make. But that one in particular, I wanted to give a little bit more context to.
Absolutely, and particularly if you have reached that point of or say not you, but if a person's reached that point of of feeling depressed, then it is going to be compounded by the fact that there may be like a lack of draw and pull towards things of joy, because that is one of the common symptoms, is a feeling of not being able to find the pleasure in perhaps things that you did once, and so all of that is going to feel very heavy and very powerful, and it's going to compound that negative self-talk and the belief structures that, as you said, that will be there, providing that, as you say, the evidence. It's going to make your thoughts feel extremely real and extremely, that what you're thinking and what you're being told internally is the truth, and I think that's the difficult. So yes, I would love to be able to provide somebody with, because I actually have been working a lot of that on, and that's what I like to do for people, is try to give them something they can use in that moment when they feel like that, because that's where the power lies. If you can take that space, as you said, if you can create some space when you feel like you haven't got space, that's a really golden thing to be able to do for yourself, definitely.
Yeah, and like you said, the feelings are real. You don't make them feel real. They are real. But again, if we were to really go back to our intention from the beginning of this session, is that can we take the complexity out of check? And when we're feeling like there's not enough space, we have to stretch. We have to stretch. So if there is life where you're feeling depressed, where there's not enough space, it's very difficult to pull things into something where there's no space. Like, there's no space to pull things in, which is why the teaching strategies about how to take care of your depressed self are not helpful. Because when you're feeling depressed and then someone says, have this, do this, say that, think that, the person's like, but there's no more room in here. And so when we are feeling depressed, like there's not enough room, we do have to stretch beyond that space. And that stretching can be as simple as, I'm just going to stand in the garden. And that could be that I'm going to turn the shower down a little bit so that the cold reflexes from my body, or even turn it up a little bit so I get a whoosh of blood through my body. It could be that, you choose to have...
with a friend, it could be a walk with pick up the guitar that you haven't picked up for 12 months.
Yes.
Could be anything, couldn't it?
Yeah.
So anything that takes you to that pleasure and peace place that you mentioned earlier on.
And I'll give one simple trick that will get somebody...
I was going to say, this is what we're getting to, and I feel like my methodology of dealing with this sort of thing is more of a longer-winded process, using the mindfulness in steps and stages to get someone to that point. So I feel a little bit disadvantaged to be able to give something really quick and powerful, and I was hoping that you'd be able to bring your experience to the table on that.
Yeah.
Obviously you can, so awesome.
I would say put some shoes on. Because if you feeling like that the world is out there and you're in here, put some shoes on. Doesn't matter whether you've got your pants on, your pajamas on, your dressing gown on, or whether, it doesn't matter, put your shoes on. Because the sensation of putting the shoes on, it tells the body that we're about to go somewhere. And if you have your shoes on for half an hour and you don't do anything at all, I'll be really surprised.
Wow.
However, remember, it could be that you simply walk to take your rubbish out, or that having your shoes on helps you stand up to make that phone call, or it helps you sort the laundry out, or change the bed, or leave the house to get into your car with the idea of going somewhere else, to work, to a friend, to the gym, to the park. When we put our shoes on, we are subconsciously saying yes. And it's also the same when we take them off. So we can also use the strategy of taking off our shoes if we're feeling like we're not sure what to do. So the practicality of putting on shoes, if you don't have them on, to create action, and taking them off the body to move us out of limbo and into rest, i.e. acceptance, is also really, really helpful. Because those are the things that's going to lead you to the more stabilizing techniques of mindfulness, which is more of a practice of a belief and a continuation of behavior. Yeah.
Something like the seed growing into the plant rather than it being just a instantaneous thing.
Yeah.
Sort of cultivating a way of being that you, as you said, you start off small and it grows until it becomes a way of being rather than it becoming second nature, as you say, or, you know, instinctive and automatic.
Yeah. And go
on. Only that again, very much in that, and I sort of wanted to emphasise it because I think it's really important. It's what you were saying about you keep making the point. Don't overlook that putting your shoes on is taking action, doing something. Could be as small as you say, taking your rubbish out, and that's, I think, a really important thing to highlight. Is, I think, as you said, there's a lot of underplaying what we do achieve and overplaying what we don't achieve. That's a thing that I think I agree with you on, and I'm sure that other people would agree on, that is it's a definite thing, isn't it? Right? It's something that we perhaps do culturally, I'm not sure. But the point is, I think it's important to be aware of that, because if we can learn to try to not fall into that habit so much, then, using that word again, habit, but you understand what I'm saying. Being that it would be really helpful and positive, because it would give it that for me is, I would describe that as the mechanism to create space.
Yeah.
The thing that is, when you talk about creating space, doing those little things is creating your space for you. That's what I would argue.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I kind of see, and I hope this metaphor works, but I kind of see, we've fallen down a hole and mindfulness says, hey, look up at the sun. And coaching and NLP says, oh, while the sun's out, look at the ladder. And it kind of beautifully facilitate each other, right? Is mindfulness teaches us to be in our environment, our internal environment, our external environment, and NLP and coaching and hypnotherapy teaches you to reignite your resources, to look for resources and skills inside and outside and use them to combine the both. And I think that this is a really helpful thing, that we don't just attempt to use one model of positive change or influence.
100%.
And that moves us into our final stage of this example, would be acceptance. And at this stage, the acceptance from that depression space, if we think about mindfulness tells us to look at the sun, and NLP and coaching tells us to see the ladder, is that this is where the uprising or feeling better happens. And on the scale that I'm looking at right now is that it reaches way above and it moves into action, externalization, and claiming of the change. So acceptance generally comes with us risk assessing and coming to a place where life as it is more uncomfortable than what it's could be if I make change. So staying here is going to be more painful for me than going over there. And this is again where the human behavior of we either do something to reduce pain, or we do something to increase pleasure.
And can I add in, I agree with what you're saying there, but that also into that point of what you've said also comes into that point of when you said about the reference, the point of reference is that that's it makes it harder for sometimes somebody else to understand it. Once you when you risk assessed it, you use the word risk assessment, but when you're risk assessing from your sort of frame of view, like your frame of your model, what's affecting you and how you feel about things. So that can make it a very difficult lens for somebody else to understand. And so I think when I was talking about that change can sometimes bring you into a little bit of conflict or misunderstanding or people not understanding you, I think it's really important to be aware of that and try not to let that be too much of a force on your decision making when you're doing it. Is try to release yourself of that because you know that you're doing what feels right energetically for you. And I think that links in. I think that's an important bit there with alongside what you're
Yeah.
saying,
No, I agree.
because that's a really important thing and actually can be a really big blockage sometimes to people
Mm,
maybe making that step because they're factoring in and they're listening to the things that are coming their way, and it might not be ill intended, but it may be fueling the reservations or the doubt or whatever. And I think to be aware of it, you can't tell someone exactly what to do, I don't believe, because that's such a complex, unique thing. So I don't believe in you should do this, but all I'm saying is merely if you can be aware of it, that's a really powerful tool. That's where I would come from the mindfulness angle, is drawing, shining a light on that bit a little bit. You know.
yeah, no, I really 100% agree. And it comes from our perspective is generally going outwards, and the optics of other people's perspective are obviously coming towards us.
Mm.
A little trick with regards to body language, the power of influence is make sure that your biology is matching your life choices, i.e., if you are going through some changes that is you're getting a pushback from your ecology, from your people in your world, make sure that as much as you can, you stay in a place of self-regulation when you share that. Because what happens is the pushback comes from what you're saying is not matching what I'm seeing. And people want you to be, generally as humans, we want you to be okay. And you're telling me with your mouth that you're okay, but you're tense in your body and or you're matching my fear response. So if you're around people that are having a fear response, whether in response to their own life or whether they're in response to your life choices, one of the biggest gifts we can give each other is moving to a place of self-regulation. And that will automate the information that you're giving to be received safely. Because all the people that are resisting us generally want to know is that we're okay and we're safe.
That's
And if we can lovingly trick or influence their bodies into a relaxed state, they will believe more what you say, assuming that what you're saying is aligned with what you believe.
of course you have to. We're going on that assumption.
Yeah,
Yeah, but there's
yeah. So
interestingly complex, isn't it? When you actually go into the layers of it, there's actually a lot of different things that come in and form up this topic.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's catch some of the things that I've heard us share, and that is, I guess, working backwards. Make sure as much as you can that your physical biology matches that which you're saying to the world. So if you're activated, stressed, or tired, it's not the greatest time for you to share things that might be scary to you or others. Depression isn't something that's squishing you, but it is a sign that you haven't got enough room. So go and get room outside of your situation and don't expect for external things to fit into that space because it's already too small.
Yes, that
Um,
lands. So when I think of some situation that anyway, sorry,
yeah, no.
really lands that because there's examples I can see from conversations I've had and my own personal. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Notice the stage of self-negotiation and bargaining, the yeah but stage. That stage is a powerful place where we can move ourselves an inch in the direction that we want very easily and passively. So notice that you're in a place of negotiation. I really want a coffee on the way to work, but I'm running late. How about we stop on the way back and have one on the way home as a random thing?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
really
An everyday
notice.
example that could be plenty, lots of different people
Yeah.
intelligent enough to put that into their own
Yeah.
perspective. Yeah.
And remember, us clinical hypnotherapists and coaches, we teach through metaphors and stories. And
Yeah,
so the
absolutely.
coffee metaphor then becomes a small metaphor for something really big in someone's life.
Hmm.
Um,
That's exactly how I teach.
Anger, allowing this to remind us of what we're consenting to. Am I wanting to be here? Did I choose to be here? And if I didn't, what can I do differently to increase my sense of choice
Mm.
in that situation? Um, and use mindfulness to change the optics of and the perspective of what's going on. If you're feeling limited in your perspective, use mindfulness for us to remind ourselves to look out at our environment. So there were some of the things that picked up today. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. That this really interesting. This it was really good to hear your perspective on it. I knew you'd be able to bring like such an excellent angle on this. It went in a slightly different direction. When just yeah, just it just went. It was really deep, and I really love it. And I love this topic because I think it encapsulates so much about our human experience. Arguably that's a bit of a no-brainer because obviously we're all if talking about a state of change, then that's a very generic term, and I have outlined the fact that's feeling of lack of change as well as so it's going to encompass everything. But you know what I mean in terms of when we all talk about it and experience it, we've all got our own unique angles on it, and I find it's really fascinating. And so much comes into it, like you said, belief structures and
Mhm.
limiting beliefs or external influence or whatever. It's all a relevant part of it, and so yeah, thank you for giving those handy tips. As I said, in my mindfulness coaching, I do aim to address these things, but for me, it's a process that takes generally a few weeks to use the mindfulness program to do. So I do feel very ill-equipped to be able to give those punchy things that you advise. So that's where you was able to bring them to the table, which is fantastic. Right?
Mm. And that's
Helpful.
because your line of work specialises in catching the ripples once they've started, right? And to smooth out those things, and
Yes.
that's appropriate. It's about, I see mindfulness as the seatbelt. It's steady, it's secure, and requires only a little effort to keep maintaining that. And my work is catching the first ripple of change that goes in
Absolutely. Yeah,
people, getting
absolutely.
people comfortable with a that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So change can be simple; it doesn't have to be hard.
I
Um,
think what we're saying on that point as well is that the experience of it, from we can acknowledge from all the things we've spoken about, is going to be quite complex at points. And so, just trying to just ease up and just as you said, just to be easy on yourself and just try to bring some acceptance into it and give yourself some space to move in it. And even if that is stretching outside of it, because when you said about the anger stage, whatever it is and wherever you are, yeah, that's the point I think we both want to make now, isn't it? Is that just
yeah,
try to understand that that's just something happening to you, and you have got these means of creating space for yourself, which will lead to bigger and better things and
yeah,
place. I think and we can both provide tools in our coaching to do that, can't we? In two different sort of methodologies, but yeah,
yeah.
great.
And I'd like to give the listeners some homework about going on a pleasure hunt and putting the to-do list literally to one side. If it was up to me, I'd burn the bloody thing. But if you're a to-do list to-doer, put that to one side and focus today on flexing the sensation of pleasure seeking. And it doesn't have to be completely, doesn't mean that you're putting your head in your sand or you're not doing the things on the
It
to-do list,
doesn't mean that. Yeah.
but look at the things on the to-do list and see which one gives you most more of a pull, as opposed to starting with the one that gives you more of a push energy. And adding pleasure to our lives can create that space where we all of a sudden become really efficient.
Mm.
And so add pleasure and it scales up our efficiency, it scales up our ability to say yes to change, and it scales up our resilience to changes that we don't really like. So thank you for talking to me about this today.
No, that's all right. And I was aware, I became aware because I introduced the session today, but I didn't actually give you an opportunity to say who you was, Rose. So for any new listeners, I think it'd be because I was so woefully unprofessional at the beginning. I think we should just maybe introduce ourselves to any new listeners, just in case,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Say who you are just to finish off with, and
yeah, my name's Roanna Harstad. I run a company called myrelaxationcoach.co.uk. I specialise in trauma informed practice. I'm a master coach, NLP, and trainer. And yeah, I run retreats internationally and I do one to one work and work also with corporate companies that would like to live in a pleasant culture of corporate life as well. So, yeah, that's me.
it's amazing. That's amazing. So my name's Dan Thompson, and I'm a mindfulness-based health and well-being coach, and yeah, using mindfulness to really try to help people cultivate skills and techniques they can use in their everyday life in a practical sense to help them, deal with common things like stress and anxiety and any challenges and difficulties they have. So that's me. Yeah. So thank you very much everyone for listening to today's podcast. It's been really good. Thank you, Ro, once again for your time and your input and expertise and knowledge and wisdom and all that jazz. And hopefully you'll all come and join us again for episode 5. We don't know what that's going to be yet, but it'll be something pretty cool. We're hoping we'll come up with something. So yeah, excellent. Thank you for tuning in, and all the best until the next time. And
Yeah,
thank
that's
you
good.
once again.
All right. Thank you so much.